Considering he's one of the oldest, most experienced, and presumably most powerful captains of the Gotei 13, I think it's pretty fair to say that fans had reasonably high expectations for what Jushiro Ukitake might bring to the table in Bleach's final arc. And I think it's absolutely fair that people had these preconceived expectations of this character. I know I certainly had some. After all, he's one of the most prestigious characters in the Soul Society. He's Shunsui Kyoraku's academy partner, and he also wields one of the semi-mythical dual-bladed Zanpakuto. However, unlike Kyoraku, Ukitake has been afforded virtually no screen time up until now in the series, feeling considerably more left out than his counterpart. And also, he was robbed of a crowning moment in the Arrancar arc, so to be honest, moving into the big final story of Bleach, it seemed the perfect moment for Ukitake to really get a chance to shine. And so in this video, I'm going to be talking about just that. Ukitake's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, how it went for him, how Kubo wrote this character, and whether or not he did him justice or not in the eyes of the fans. So of course, there will be spoilers for the Thousand Year Blood War arc to follow. Before we begin, guys, a massive thank you to everyone who has subscribed so far, as we did hit our milestone of 60,000 subs, which is just completely insane. Another one of those milestones I never dreamed we would hit. And so thank you so much to everyone who has supported me so far. On the road to 100k, I think probably the next major milestone has to be 75,000, 3/4 of the way there. So if you are a Bleach fan and you haven't subbed yet, make sure to hit that button now for videos like this every single week. And while you're here, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed what you saw, as it does help with the exposure and getting it out there to more people so more people can join in the discussion. And also, if you want to take that support of my channel just a little step further, we do now have a Patreon as well, where we're really close to 50 patrons, which is another milestone I'd absolutely love to hit. So if you want to go there, you can support me for as little as $1 a month if you really enjoy what I do here on the channel. So I just want to give a massive thanks to everyone who has become a patron so far. It's really appreciated. So, looking at Jushiro Ukitake in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and as I've mentioned in some of my recent videos, particularly the one about Unohana, the Thousand Year Blood War arc has real themes in it to do with history and looking at the past of some of these characters, the guilty past of some of the older captains of the Gotei 13. Yamamoto having to deal with the skeletons in his closet, the literal demon in his closet that is Yhwach, Kyoraku Shunsui being given so much responsibility and new burdens to shoulder, Unohana having to face up with her own reality in the fact that she used to be this rampaging criminal. And then there's Ukitake, the fourth member of our group of elder captains in the Gotei 13, many of whom are privy to the Soul Society's deepest and darkest secrets. Ukitake's skeletons in the closet reach considerably higher than anyone else's, as he is directly connected to the mystical and very mysterious Soul King. A character that I am going to talk about very soon on this channel, as I haven't really spoken about him too much, and to me, he is still Bleach's greatest mystery, despite the answers we might have got in Can't Fear Your Own World. But Ukitake, is, as it turns out, is the closest thing any of these characters really get to the Soul King, and many of them don't even know it until right at the very end. That being said, Ukitake's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, despite being cool and despite being unique and having some implications for the lore, is ultimately underwhelming in my opinion. His overall role is a disappointment, and I generally tend to defend Kubo whenever his writing is called into question. I love the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and I can find many things about the arc that I truly enjoy. However, as someone who was looking forward to seeing Ukitake take a real stand in this arc and do something of real purpose, I was let down, I have to be honest. When I look at two characters who are often compared in terms of the treatment they receive from Kubo, Ukitake and Unohana, as far as I'm concerned, Unohana had a much better job done with her. I think her character was just more interesting in the end. Kubo fulfilled a number of promises he made about Unohana prior to the final arc, that she would fight, she would reveal her true nature and unravel her braid and all that sort of thing. And I think overall she was handled better than Ukitake was. And I think Ukitake was a problem character for Kubo in many ways. Just based on what we know in the final arc and how the character was handled, I don't think Kubo forgot about him per se, as could be the case for many characters. I think it's more Kubo surveyed the story he had like unraveling in front of him and just could not find anywhere to naturally include Ukitake at all. And that's a real shame because the Thousand Year Blood War arc juggles so many characters and yet makes so many of them feel so worthwhile. And that goes doubly so for a good number of the captains, but Ukitake well and truly draws the short straw out of them all. But let's actually dive into his role then in the Thousand Year Blood War arc to see if we can't pinpoint where things go wrong for this character and where our expectations did not mesh up to reality. So like I said, Ukitake is a major player in the Soul Society, although he is also slightly more of a background player as far as the captains go. A lot of that can be attributed to his illness that is a recurring theme throughout this series for him. He doesn't show up until sort of midpoint of the Soul Society arc, for instance, because he's incapacitated for most of it prior to that. Despite that, though, it's well known that he is hugely respected among the Gotei 13. He's incredibly wise, very powerful, wields this Sanpakuto Sogyo no Kotowari, which, like Katen Kyokotsu, is a dual-bladed Shikai. There's a lot of mystery around this guy, a lot of things to get excited for. But in the Urankar arc, he was wiped out of the fight before it even really got a chance to get off the ground, and we missed out seeing him do anything of real importance there either. So we move to the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and it's kind of weird then that Ukitake basically does absolutely nothing for the first third or so of this arc. He's kind of there every now and then. He shows up at the start in the captain's meeting. He's in the first invasion. He's at the sort of semi-funeral for Yamamoto. But during all of this, he does really nothing at all. And what's really interesting to note here is that the partnership, the equal partnership between Kyoraku and Ukitake is skewed further in Kyoraku's favour here than ever before. And I love Kyoraku. He's literally probably my second favourite character in the whole series, but there can be no denying, certainly in this arc, but to be honest, the groundwork has been laid for this ever since, I would say, the Urankar arc, that Kyoraku is Kubo's favourite of the two, or at the very least the character he feels more confident in pushing the story forwards with. You know, you can see this everywhere in the final arc. Kyoraku is the one who gets the actual fight in the first invasion, he dukes it out with Robert Akutrone. Ukitake is shown a couple of times, you never even get a proper look at who his opponent is. Many people have theorised it's Askin, but it genuinely could be one of a few characters. It's inconsequential either way because you basically don't see the fight. Ukitake is there at Yamamoto's funeral, a greatly powerful and impactful scene where he says basically nothing, and it's so weird to me because Ukitake is one of Yamamoto's surrogate sons alongside Kyoraku. You know, as far as we know, Yamamoto didn't favour one or the other, but it really feels like Kubo does. Kyoraku's the one who gets everything out of this relationship. He's the one who gets the mini flashback with Yamamoto just before Yama dies. He's the one who screams Yamaji as he senses that Yamamoto dies. The best we get out of Ukitake is a shocked eye, you know, like his eye widening in horror when he realises, but Kyoraku is given everything in this relationship, and it detrimentally affects Ukitake's character, and he fades further and further into the background. You know, it's so noticeable in the scene of Yamamoto's funeral, where they're standing around the shattered blade of Ryujin Jaka. There's a lot of infighting going on between the captains. I've mentioned in the past how much I love this scene. It's incredible character work, but Ukitake is virtually left out of the entire thing. And it's, again, Kyoraku who comes in, quells the fighting, and lays the groundwork for him taking up the role of head captain. And it's interesting because you get this dynamic between them where previously they were supposed to be like the equal sons of Yamamoto, but in this arc, more than ever, it feels like Kyoraku's like the elder son who's really taking on all of the burdens and all of the responsibility that their father has left behind, and Ukitake does virtually nothing. And it's a big shame. Like, I can't believe Ukitake, he barely says anything. The only thing he says in that funeral is that they couldn't find Yamamoto's body, basically. And so perhaps you can assume maybe he's giving some kind of eulogy at the start of that scene that we don't get to see, but It's a real shame how much he is pushed into the background. And again, the same is kind of true for the later events after this. When the Royal Guard arrive for the first time in however long, Kyoraku is the one who engages them. He's the one who talks up to Ichibei and stands his ground. And then after that, when Kyoraku becomes the captain commander, there's a wonderful scene where he receives the news and he's like so downtrodden about it. He's really unhappy that this another burden has been placed on his shoulders, but this would have been a brilliant opportunity for some Ukitake counsel, for a bit of advice from his best friend and his lifelong partner both on the battlefield and in the academy and everything like that. And yet Ukitake is nowhere to be seen. Ukitake being nowhere to be seen is a bit of a trend in this arc if you hadn't worked it out already. The massive second invasion begins, and this is the first time we get a hint that Ukitake might be up to something a little bit more in the background. He's seen in a shrine, a strange shrine out in the Rukongai, with his two attendants, Kione and Sentaro. However, if you were hoping to see Ukitake in any meaningful capacity after this tease, you would again be disappointed. There are a few captains who are not present at the start of the second invasion, and I kind of thought Kubo was going to stagger them all with, pretty epic appearances. And for the most part, that does happen. Soifon arrives on the battlefield at the nick of time to save Omaida from BG9's minigun, just completely ripping it away from him and dropping the bullets on the ground. It's a great display of her speed as the captain of the stealth division. Later on, Komamura arrives once again at the most dire moment, crash landing in front of Bambietta in this epic pose, towering over her, brand new armour on his head, showing you that he has changed. And then finally, Byakuya arrives on the scene, cutting through Asnot's veil of eyes to help Rukia, essentially amass the conviction needed to use Bankai and win the day. These are all meaningful arrivals that actually really help to change the course of the particular moment that they are involved in. Ukitake gets no such arrival, unfortunately, in just a long string of Ukitake-related disappointments in this arc. At the very start of the battle between Ichibei and Yamamoto, the fighting has now essentially left the Seirei and moved up to the Royal Palace for the final few stages of this war. Things are really on the line now. Yuha is close to achieving his goal, the Soul King is in his sights, and really you should be worried. And Kyoraku's kind of surveying the damage on the battlefield, wondering that when the Vandenreich city leaves, will it just be replaced by Soul Society, and if Soul Society is destroyed, will it be reduced to rubble? And he just turns around and says, "What do you think, Ukitake?" And Ukitake is just standing there, and it's kind of weird, that he gets afforded no such important introduction really whatsoever. He's just standing there. He even looks kind of sad on the page. He's just this small drawing, only given a small panel essentially at the top of the page, and there really is no importance afforded to his arrival just yet anyway. And it's a bit of a shame to see that he's not really given any kind of gravitas whatsoever. He just sort of shows up. How long's he been there? I have no idea. Did he just arrive? We have no idea. We then finally get a conversation between Shunsui and Ukitake. These two have such a bond that it is criminal that they don't talk more in the final arc, especially when you realise eventually just how permanent the ramifications of what's about to happen will be. There is a nice couple of moments here, though, for Ukitake when he says, well, if the Soul Society is destroyed, we'll simply rebuild it. Brilliant Ukitake line that sums up his character very well. Ever the optimist, he's always thinking about the best side of things, even in moments of pure chaos and trouble. In that sense, he is kind of the light to Kyoraku's darkness, which I really do like. We then get into a little bit of conversation about the current scenario where Kyoraku's like, well, we've allowed them access into the royal palace, and Ukitake says, I'm aware of that, it's for that reason I've initiated Kami Kake, which I believe translates to divine vow or divine possession. And this is when things do start to get interesting. When Ukitake says this, he looks real sinister, and this big black shadow appears behind him, stretching out across the floor with this one sinister eye opening in the middle of the shadow. And that's really cool. Like, the whole Soul King motif that you start to get here, you realise immediately that Ukitake has done something to do with Ryo. Some kind of a contract, or even as it says by the name, some kind of possession. And immediately, I think most people worked out that Ukitake was working on some kind of contingency plan for if the Soul King fell. And that's cool. I'm happy with that. And in fact, I like that Ukitake has such intimate ties to Ryo, because the Soul King is an entity that is so far removed from just about every single character that it actually makes a lot of sense for one of the older captains to have those ties to the monarchy, essentially. I want to point out now, though, what I find to be so weird about this conversation between the two of them. These two, again, are supposed to be, best friends, like close friends, brothers in arms, essentially. And yet, Kyoraku treats the whole situation with his usual flippancy, and Ukitake himself doesn't seem too concerned either. Kyoraku basically kind of says that, well, because you've done the kamikake and it looks like it was successful, we can maybe push things a little bit, and, essentially what he's implying here is that even if the Soul King is killed, even if the Zero Division are killed, we still have a way out. Ukitake then says, you're starting to sound like a doctor. Obviously, his medical history, he's dealt with a lot of that sort of thing. At which point, Kyoraku basically just says, okay, I'll see you later then. What's really weird here to me is, unless Kyoraku is incredibly ignorant, which I don't think he is, because he seems to know what the kamikake is, he must know that Ukitake is about to stake his life on the line. He must realise that if Ichibei falls in this fight and Yhwach is successful in taking out the Soul King, Ukitake is about to give up his life. And you could maybe argue, well, Kyoraku doesn't think Ichibei's going to lose. He just thinks it's a contingency. That's fine, except Kyoraku mentions that he's about to go and speak to the Central 46, which means that he's about to try and get Aizen released from prison to help if the end of the world comes, essentially. Which means he can't have enormous amount of faith that Ichibei's not about to die. It's for this reason I find this whole conversation between them kind of strange. It is their last conversation they ever have alive together, because the worst scenario does happen. Ichibei is killed, the Soul King is killed, Ukitake must step forward and offer up his life. So it's just weird to me that Kyoraku is so flippant about the whole thing. Maybe he just doesn't want to accept that Ukitake might be about to die, or maybe it's the darker side of Kyoraku, the very pragmatic side, who's always willing to do what's necessary, who can kind of overlook that, but the whole thing is a little strange to me. Regardless, we do move on now, and Ukitake has joined many of the Shinigami at their makeshift stronghold, and he is helping administer first aid to those who are injured, Ikkaku, Yumichika, Kenpachi, etc. And it's nice to see him, again, taking an active role in the war. He hasn't been able to fight anyone yet, despite the ample number of enemies that were running around previously. But he is taking up a role. He's helping out probably the very struggling 4th Division, who are currently being run by Isane and Hanataro. So I liked to see that. However, up in the Royal Palace, things are not quite so rosy. Ichibei has been murdered by Yhwach. Yhwach has trespassed into the throne room of Ryo himself and stabbed his father through the chest. However, Ryo is actually not quite dead yet. Ichigo himself does that deed and accidentally finishes off the king, cutting him in half. And now, of course, the moment the king is killed, the 3 worlds begin to return to their primordial state. They sort of begin to start smashing together again. It's a very slow process, though, it seems. And places only really start to feel tremors. The Soul Society is affected more so, as it's so directly in the vicinity. And I actually loved this moment. This was the kind of plot progression I was desperate to see, because it really does mean that the stakes have come true. Yhwach has pushed the heroes essentially as far as they can go. And I think this whole section does a great job of showing that despair and that concern. I love the cliffhanger, the way you see Rukongai get splitting in half. There's like an earthquake. Waco Mundo and Karakura feel the effects, and Renji is just like, the Soul King is dead. What do we do? Like, what do we do in this situation where everyone has failed? We're all down here. Even Urahara is like, I don't know what to do. And Ukitake steps forward. And it's really cool because it's like, that is awesome. Ukitake is the contingency. He had this planned. That's what he's been working on this whole time. And yeah, Urahara's like, I don't know what to do in this situation. And Ukitake steps forward and he's like, I will become the Soul King. And that's awesome. So basically what's going on here is Ukitake has always housed a part of the Soul King. He is essentially a retainer for the Soul King. The Soul King in Shinigami form. When he was a very young boy, we've always known that Ukitake had some kind of serious, debilitating illness. It's affected him throughout the series so far, and we see when he was about 3 years old or so, he's foaming at the mouth. You don't get much backstory for him, unfortunately, in the final arc, but you do get this tantalizing little teaser of him, like, dying on the floor, essentially. And his parents turn out to be very superstitious, and they worship this god of Rukongai, this fallen god, called Mimihagi-sama. And Mimihagi-sama is a character who is introduced in Bleach kind of randomly. I remember reading the chapter name, which was literally Mimihagi-sama, and being like, what the hell is this on about? Like, what is this? But Mimihagi's ramifications for the lore are huge. And you find out that Mimihagi is essentially a sentient right arm. It literally looks like this, with an eye on its back. It seems to be wearing clothes as well in this panel, which is the best look we get at it, and honestly is fascinating in my opinion. Is this a new robe it has fashioned itself, or is this a portion of the Soul King's own sleeve? I have no idea. But essentially, this is the Soul King's right arm that at some undisclosed point in history fell from the heavens and landed in the Rukongai and has since been worshipped by its people. And Mimihagi grants the parents' wish, and he saves Ukitake's life by removing his diseased lungs and taking their place inside him, essentially. So Ukitake has been housing this piece of the Soul King for centuries now. And, you know, he has immense Reiatsu because of it. He has massively powerful Reiatsu because he's been having to keep himself alive as well at the same time, sustaining Mimihagi, which I think is really cool. And so what happens here is that now the Soul King has been killed, essentially. The worlds are all starting to be destroyed. And Ukitake steps in to act as an anchor point, essentially, for Mimihagi to try and right this wrong. So we know, of course, that Mimihagi is the right hand of the Soul King, which represents stillness, and its counterpart is Pernida Pankajaz, the Quincy, that represents progression. That's not important for now, we just need to look at Mimihagi. Mimihagi represents stillness, and we see that firsthand when Ukitake essentially invokes the right of Kamikake and allows Mimihagi to come forth from his body. In doing so, he offers up all of his internal organs now, not just the lungs, but all of his internal organs to Mimihagi to give it the power to basically rush towards the Soul King Palace and save the day. Ukitake's body is now literally a husk, a vessel for Mimihagi to use as it needs to. And you see this, it's actually really, really cool. I love the imagery on display is awesome. Ukitake is like hunched over, he takes off his robe, there's a massive black shadow that comes off of his back, bursts in the air above him, revealing this huge eye. It's all very occult, it's all very sinister and creepy, and I really like that, actually. And it fits with the whole theme of the older captains having these dark secrets, and it looks creepy and eerie, and you know it's not quite right. But it is being used for the good of the world. So Mimihagi races into the sky and grabs the two halves of the Soul King and basically pushes it back together again. So Mimihagi is holding on to the Soul King. That's the stillness that it governs. And by doing so, Ukitake has become a makeshift Soul King replacement. He is anchoring Mimihagi, and Mimihagi is saving the day and stopping the tremors. As for Ukitake himself, this is a noble thing for him to do, and it is very memorable as well. I like how it's portrayed, and it does give you something by which to remember this character by. You're like, that's the guy who became the right arm of the Soul King in their time of need. That's really, really cool. He gains like all these tattoos and markings over his body, which look awesome. His actual fate, however, is grim. Like, it's really dark, it's brutal, and again, I kind of like that. I think it's really great seeing how Kubo depicts the horrors of war. Like, Ukitake probably wasn't expecting a lovely death to come out of this scenario, and it really doesn't. You see him scream in agony as Mimihagi like bursts forth and goes up to the royal palace. Its energy leaves his eyes, his mouth, his nose. You get the sense that he has just become a shell and there is nothing left inside him, which is kind of gruesome. And you see Rukia freaking out. You see Sentaro and Kione freaking out and looking really upset about it. It's a shame that Rukia doesn't spend more time with Ukitake prior to this, especially after becoming his vice captain, but it's a nice moment all the same. Unfortunately, this doesn't last, and now we get to the reasons why I think Ukitake is not handled well. And there are two reasons. The reasons are twofold. Number one, this is Ukitake's big crowning moment, and I get that, and that's fine. The problem I have with it is that he does absolutely nothing before it. He does nothing in the arc before this moment at all, so he basically just shows up to die. He could have fought a Sternritter, killed a Sternritter, had an awesome moment where we see his Bankai perhaps. We see why he's so respected and revered in the Gotei 13. We see that, yeah, he is Kyoraku's equal in many ways. He's really powerful himself. And then he goes on to give his life for the Gotei. And I think people wouldn't have minded so much. But it's just the simple fact that he does just pop up out of nowhere. And he's like, I've done the Kamikake. And then he dies essentially 4 chapters later. It's a bit of a shame. That is a shame that he just shows up to die. And then we move on to my second issue with this, which is that his big sacrifice kind of feels like it was for nothing. And not only does it feel like it was for nothing, it almost actively helps the enemy. So we see that once Mimihagi has gone up to the royal palace, it manages to stabilize the world. And this is the Kamikake working as intended. Ukitake says that he knows he was supposed to die. He wasn't even supposed to have this body anymore, so he's very happy to give it up for the Soul Society that he so loves and so cares for. And so, yeah, it's really hard seeing him just like lying there as like an empty husk. You can imagine in the anime, maybe he's been like twitching every now and then while this black Reiatsu just gushes from where his face once was. Unfortunately, though, even though he does succeed, it's a brief success, because Ichigo and his friends, they managed to sort of start making Mimihagi the new Soul King replacement. They put a barrier up around it, but because of Yuha, because of Uryu's treachery in this scene, and the Schutzstaffel, they are not able to keep Yuha away from Mimihagi for very long. And Yuha just basically walks over there and rips Mimihagi off the Soul King. So Ukitake has died, given his life for this, and Mimihagi stabilized the world for 10 minutes. Like, when you think about it in terms of, you ignore the fact that we had to wait for these weekly, it's about 10 minutes. And that really sucks. And he just basically tosses Mimihagi to the ground. And then, when Mimihagi tries to attack him again, he absorbs its power and becomes the Soul King. So I guess in that sense the world is stabilised, but it's undeniably a real shame to see this as the outcome of Ukitake's valiant sacrifice. And it's clear that once again he is massively shafted in the story in comparison to Kyoraku and frankly most other captains in the story. It's a real shame that he basically shows up out of nowhere to enact this very cool ritual that has great lore implications, but unfortunately just doesn't really do much, and he kind of looks a little bit silly in some ways, like giving his life with this grandiose speech only for Yuha to forcibly pull Mimihagi out of his body mere chapters later. And you see like the darkness blow out of Ukitake's mouth as he just collapses backwards, being cradled by Kione and Sentaro. So that's pretty much it for Ukitake's role. You know, the next time you see him in the present storyline, he is just his gravestone, and it's confirmed that he was killed. And it's a big shame. It is a shame, but that's pretty much it for this character in Bleach. There's a little bit more with him in Can't Fear Your Own World, but as far as his canon manga appearance in the 1000-Year Blood War arc goes, I unfortunately have no hesitation in saying that I was disappointed. And I think if he had just done more of substance prior to this moment, people would have accepted it more. Because I do think it's a cool moment, and I do think it's awesome, like I said, that one of the elder captains has these ties to Reo, who is a character that I'm going to talk about very soon, because I do still think he's the greatest mystery in Bleach, even with the nuances we have. So it's really cool seeing this kind of occult magic being used. But at the end of the day, it's a real shame that this is Ukitake's contribution, and it seems to be cast aside so easily. Like, it felt like Kubo was like, I don't know where to fit Ukitake in. We'll use him here as this very temporary countermeasure, and then I'll just kill him off. And that's a real shame to me. Alright guys, but I really hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Ukitake in the 1000 Year Blood War arc. Did you like what happened to this character? Let me know in the comments below as well. Maybe I've missed something about him too. Do let me know. I'd love to read your thoughts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well if you haven't done already. And until next time guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.